Today the trekkers are taking you to Mount Vernon, George Washington's home along the Potomac River near Alexandria, Virginia. The land belonged to his family for many years, but he built the actual house in 1757. I'm David.
And I'm Alfonso.
And we're Virginia Trekkers. And we're today at Mount Vernon in the coastal plain region of Virginia.
We're going to take a quick look at where George Washington lived and all the way until he died.
So come on, let's go trekking.
Let's go! As you see, George is a pretty tall guy. Actually taller than Dave, taller than myself. We're going to find out a little bit more about our first president of the United States, George Washington.
Martha, I'm taller than her though. You all know a lot about George Washington. He's called the father of our country because he helped us win our independence from Great Britain, and he was also our first president. So it's a privilege to come to this famous man's house. Unfortunately, it was being constructed while we were there. So me and Alfonso couldn't really show you a close-up of the front, but we did find a model inside the museum.
But this is what we call the mansion. This was George Washington's house. It started off with 1.5 stories, but he later built onto it to make it 2.5 stories.
And luckily the backside wasn't being constructed, so let's head over there.
George Washington acquired this house in 1754, and he stayed here until his death in 1799.
Even though he traveled a lot during the war and his presidency, he always came back to beautiful Mount Vernon. And as he pans the camera around, you can see what George Washington saw as he looked out his back porch. Isn't this a beautiful view? You can see this river. Now, I know y'all have been studying the 4 major rivers of Virginia. Which river is this? I'll give you a hint. It's near Washington, D.C. Did you say the Potomac River? You got it. That's the Potomac River behind me. And he used the Potomac River to export all the wonderful products he grew here. His crops and the fish. He just had to carry it all the way down to the river and ship it. It went all the way to the Caribbean and to Europe.
Well, you probably know George Washington as a famous president, of course, but he was also kind of like a famous scientist. He would do a lot of experiments on plants. He would take exotic plants, plants that he just didn't know about, and he would try to find some different uses that for that plant.
And George Washington came up with some very creative ways for growing those plants. See that stove in there? He didn't use that stove for cooking. He used that stove to heat his plants that came from exotic locations like lemon trees, orange trees, those kind of things, so they could grow through the winter here in Virginia. Here I am in George Washington's fruit garden, fruit orchard, and here he grew cherries, peaches, pears, apples, all those delicious fruits you love to eat. And I sure could use a nice fresh peach right now.
What was the old tale about an apple tree?
Oh yeah. And this reminds me of an old tale about George Washington and the cherry tree. Remember his father asked him who chopped down the cherry tree? And George Washington admitted it, that he had done it because he said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie." Boys and girls, I hope you're just as honest as George Washington was.
No, George Washington never had a car, but he did have some good horses and some good mules. Take a look. Remember, he had a lot of harvesting to do, so he depended on slaves, indentured servants, but he also depended upon some animals.
They not only grew their own food at Mount Vernon, but they also made their own cloth and other things they needed. Just like at the Monticello, George Washington's house, he wanted to have as much stuff right here to keep him independent, making everything that he needed right here. So you're going to be able to see that he has gardens here to grow his food, and right here we have a spinning room where they actually made cloth and ropes right here. Now he would order his clothes from England, but as far as just making regular everyday cloth, they'd spin it right here out of wool or flax.
Because George Washington's house was pretty much interdependent, he needed workers. He needed some slaves, and he would quarter the slaves in a house kind of like this. And you can see where they had bunk beds. They did other living. They had their drying of their clothes. They had a fireplace to do their cooking. They had a little spinning wheel to do their making for their clothing. So pretty much they took care of all of their needs inside their quarters.
George Washington also had a distillery for making his own drinks and a gristmill for grinding his own grain. All right, right near Mount Vernon, George Washington built a gristmill. And you can see it behind us. You can't actually see the wheel, but it's water powered. A little stream runs through and moves the wheel to grind the grain inside. And if you want to take a tour of a gristmill, check out our McCormick Farm podcast.
Now he built this gristmill to harvest his own wheat, but he also did it with other folks as well. The people around him didn't have a way to turn this wheat into flour, so they bring it over here and he would do it for them.
And the biting flies here are pretty bad, so we're gonna head on out.
They're really, really bad.
We didn't get a chance to show you the distillery, but here's Martha Washington coming out of it. And now our last stop is the Washington Tomb.
Behind me is where George Washington and his whole family were buried, but according to George Washington's will, he desired that a new, larger vault to be built. So in 1831, the whole family, up to 20 members, were moved to the new vault. Let's go take a look at it.
All right, so here behind me is where George Washington is buried. His actual body's there. Well, we hope you enjoyed our tour of Mount Vernon. There was a whole lot more to show you, but it was just too hot, so we're gonna head out. Well, George and Martha, we'd just like to thank them for letting us see their house today. Boys and girls, us trekkers, we're getting too old to do this anymore. It's 96 degrees today. I'm David.
And I'm Alfonso.
And we're Virginia Trekkers. And we're here today at Mount Vernon in... Where are we? Now, boys and girls, on a hot day like today, make sure you're eating plenty of water.
Oh, tell them about not only
start
did they
feeling
harvest crops,
nauseated or faint-hearted, you might have heat stroke.
or you might just be a daggone wimp like Big Dave.
And look how sweaty I am. That's sweat. That's not Potomac River water. That's sweat, people.
That's not sweat. That's complaints. Again!